So we have a very critical subject today, and it's a subject that is worrying the agent world tremendously, and it's the dangers of telecommunication consolidation. Do you have a plan? And the channel landscape, as you know, is changing rapidly. New mega carriers are forming and margins are getting squeezed. As carriers grow larger, you and your customers will become less waiting to see how this consolidation will affect your business. Learn how to protect your customers and revenue streams today. And we have an expert on that subject today. The gentleman's name is Peter Raditsky, and he is a founder and president of RadInfo Incorporation. He's an accomplished blogologist, speaker, author of Telecom and Setting the Sail, contributing writer for Internet Telephony magazine, and an in-demand speaker and consultant. He has helped many service providers with sales, training, marketing, channel development, and business strategy. He's a trusted source of knowledge about the telecom sector, and his honest and direct approach make him a refreshing speaker at many industry conferences. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Lanny. Appreciate AireSpring having me on today. I'm going to hit M&A and then all the top topics that we hear about all the time: UCaaS, SD-WAN, cloud, IoT. Then I'm going to give you guys some strategy tips before Lanny gets back on and gives you the AireSpring announcements. At the channel show, if you were in Vegas, the big three topics were SD-WAN, which is just about everywhere, unified communications, and IoT. The thing that really stood out for me was how big the presence for the VADs were. So a VAD is a value-added distributor like Tech Data, ScanSource, Synex. They typically hang around with VARs, and them showing up at the show and having, some of them had 2 booths each, says to me that there's a lot more VARs coming to Vegas to the channel partner show than before, and it also shows that the VADs really need some help from the agents to sell some hardware. Every year, Vertical Systems put out a leaderboard for Ethernet. If you notice on the last one they did, there's only 2 CLECs left. Both of them are being bought by ILEX. Verizon scooped up XO already, and Level 3 is getting scooped up by CenturyLink, which means next year there'll be absolutely no CLECs on this list, and it'll be just cable and ILEC, which is a far cry from what the channel has typically been selling. The other thing going on, you got a lot of carriers shifting around. The RBox, Verizon and AT&T, they're now, all wireless and all entertainment, and they really don't want to talk about their telco. Verizon so much so that they bought AOL and Yahoo, which didn't make sense to anyone, especially when they rebranded it as Oath. AT&T is buying Time Warner after they already bought DirecTV. They're getting as far away from the actual pipe as possible. Sprint's for sale. Their wireline division's been for sale for a couple of years, doesn't even generate $500 million. This is the pin drop network that they were famous for. Not even $500 million in sales anymore. I'm not going to go over all of the consolidation, but as you can see, there's been a ton of it, including the latest from Windstream picking up Broadview Networks. Data centers are hot. Private equity firms are getting into this space for the cash flow. Our industry, for the most part, is in a state of a lot of M&A, a lot of integration, and apparently a lot of money is coming in to grab this stuff up. That's good, that's bad. Leaves us with a whole lot of name brand carriers to sell, that's for sure. A lot of this has to do with the fact that pricing is compressing. If you look at the wholesale divisions for a lot of these companies, their enterprise revenue is down, their consumer revenue is down. A lot of these pies, when we talk about broadband, TV, cable, or cellular, those pies are static. They're not going to get any bigger. It's a takeaway game, and it's really hard to increase revenue when you're fighting competition. Even in the channel, there's been consolidation. The most famous being Intelisys being scooped up by ScanSource, and then ScanSource scooping up Kingcom because that's who Intelisys was using for Verizon. You also had the last big merger was X4 and Sandler. All the talk was there's going to be a bunch more of this. Hasn't happened. I don't know why. We're all like waiting with bated breath for more of this M&A. Got a couple things going on for master agents, which is making it a little troubling for them. One, partners are aging. At the show, if you didn't notice, most of us are above the 45-year-old line, not too many below 30. In the last 3 years, about 1/3 of the partners have left the space. On the VAR and MSP side, a lot of them got out of that kind of thing and went to other techie things because they didn't want to be salespeople for Microsoft and Cisco. They actually liked doing the techie thing, and selling all day was making them want to throw up. At the same time, about 700 vendors entered the space. A lot of those are cloud vendors. A lot of them are cybersecurity vendors, backup vendors, UCaaS vendors. But that's a lot of vendors coming in as partner numbers are shrinking. You got razor-thin margins. This is master agents because they're paying out 90-10. Some of them are doing 100% pass-through to other master agents just so they can hit quota. They've got declining revenues coming against recast contracts. They've got increased carrier quota. It's a squeeze play. The other problem that they have is differentiation. You know, as an agent, if you're just shopping around for percentages and all you're looking for is the percentage, it's hard for them to differentiate except on what they pay you. And as you saw with a few of them like Telarus and Intelisys adding SD-WAN and some monitoring, they're doing their best to figure out how they're going to be a little different, add more value to the partners. There's also a bunch of channel blindness. The top one is from the Broadview Windstream investor deck, 300 masters. There weren't 300 masters. And the bottom was from Rank Central investor deck, where they said the 8 masters gave them 200,000 sub-agents for UCaaS. We've got more than 2,000 hosted VoIP providers in the U.S. 400 of them are on BroadSoft, 700 of them are on Metaswitch, 150 on NetSapiens. I don't even know how many are on some open source brand. That's a lot of competition. That's a lot of noise in a corridor that is only at 25% penetration. And then Amazon decided they were going to do Chime, which is basically a WebEx GoToMeeting competitor. And they went to market with that with both Vonage and Level 3. And then at the Enterprise Connect show 4 weeks ago, they launched the Cloud Contact Center to really shake things up for people like InContact. At the same time, their Alexa is being used by quite a few VoIP providers to do voice-enabled dialing and to turn their little Alexa devices into speakerphones, which isn't really making Polycom happy because they already have enough competition with Jabber's new speakerphone, which got rave reviews at the EC show. Hosted PBX. You look at an average master agent. This one happens to be an example of that came out of Telarus. They have 37 hosted PBX suppliers. Your average master has at least 20. How do you figure out who you're going to use? It's tough for anyone to even know what the difference is in 10 carriers, let alone 37. So that makes it tough for everybody, and a lot of us end up choosing by price or by feature. Then you have Office 365. Microcorp has this many vendors selling Office 365. It's very tough to differentiate. One of the few that does differentiate is Level 3, where they'll tell you it has to be 500 seats or higher or they don't get involved. But for everyone else, it's a free-for-all. This makes it a numbers game. It makes it a commodity for all of us, and we don't make as much money. It'd be much better if they all told you exactly what their target market is, but I'm not sure that they know what it is. I think it's just anyone. I just want revenue, whether it's profitable or not. There's one more problem for UCaaS besides too many players, the users. The users are choosing what they want to use as a tool, and for a lot of them, it's Hangouts, Skype, WhatsApp, and all these other little consumer apps that they use to do most of the communicating with, and none of that is being captured under the enterprise corporate umbrella. And the comms are shifting. Not only is it shifting to Facebook Messenger, but it's Slack and HipChat and all the competitors that have come out in the last 7 months to compete with Slack, who has the lead. Then there's stuff like CPaaS, which Vonage went and bought Nexmo, and Nexmo is Twilio's biggest competitor. These guys just enable voice. They don't really have a user interface. They enable voice. Like for Uber. When you're on Uber and your driver calls you to say he's outside, that's Twilio in the background. There's going to be more and more of that where it's going to be, we're not dialing anybody. Nobody knows our number. Nobody knows our email address, but they're still able to communicate with us. And that's really what we want, to make it that simple for somebody to get hold of us. It's kind of like why there's so many silos of communications. Because maybe I'm only connected with you on Twitter, so I'm going to DM you on Twitter because it's the easiest way to get hold of you. Or I know you're on WhatsApp. Maybe I don't know your phone number or I don't have it with me. The hosted PBX market started somewhere around 2003 when BroadSoft rolled out its second customer. We're talking about 14 years later, PBX sales are still greater than CAGR on cloud comms. With Avaya's bankruptcy, that may all change because Avaya's bankruptcy, ShoreTel saying they wanted to get sold, Toshiba getting out of the business, these things did affect UC sales in the last quarter. We saw it with ScanSource, and we saw it with a couple other public companies that put it in their little notes to the SEC. So maybe soon hosted PBX will beat PBX, but right now it's PBX still winning. SD-WAN, I'm sure you heard that a couple of times in Vegas. It's the big three that all we want to talk about. It's kind of like sitting with a vegan CrossFit person that went to Burning Man. Blah, blah, blah. I get it. Here's one of the problems with our industry, and it goes back quite a long time. We like to sell tech as a product. SD-WAN is technology. SIP, VOIP, WebRTC, technology. It's not a product. It powers a product, but we sell it as technology. That's kind of a problem because they don't do that with food or cars. For SD-WAN, they're calling it the MPLS killer. I'm not so sure that's going to happen, but it's a pendulum swing. We were at IPVPN, and now we're swinging back to IPVPN. For SD-WAN, the big highlights are you're simplifying WAN management, you're adding WAN transparency, you're connecting to clouds like Azure, AWS, Google, IBM, SoftLayer, and you're accelerating the apps that are in the cloud. And also it's going to act like an SLA cop because of the monitoring analytics. You're going to know exactly who has the worst pipe, and I don't think any of us will be shocked by who that is. And the other reason that we're hearing so much about SD-WAN is because cloud has broken MPLS. And I say that because when you think about an MPLS pipe, let's say we have 10 megs into every office and 100 meg into the HQ, your internet pipe is probably a gig because all of it's going out to the internet, whether it's going to AWS or Office 365 or Google Apps, Salesforce, all the SaaS that's being used, it's all going through the internet egress port. So then you got an admin who doesn't like MPLS anyway because it's too complicated for him. He's looking at the traffic has dropped and dropped and dropped. He wants to go back to IPVPN, and that's where SD-WAN comes in. But we do kind of have a problem. The problem is that I was at the WAN Summit in New York City 3 weeks ago. The Gap retail stores, VWR, and Schneider Electric, their CIOs all presented on the SD-WAN migrations that they'd already completed sometime in the last 18 months. All they really talked about was the cost savings. When you boiled it all down, it was all about cost savings. And Telegeography is a group that does enterprise transit and transport pricing globally. And they suggested that going forward, SD-WAN will probably knock off anywhere between 40 and 60% of MPLS pricing. So think about that. If you have a bunch of MPLS networks out there, and when those contracts are up, you're going to lose 40 to 60% of the revenue on that. What's it going to do to the commissions? Never mind the carriers who already have this problem where revenue is constantly recast down, recast down, recast down. As agents, our commissions keep going down and down and down. We're selling more and more and more just to stay afloat. And in SD-WAN, you got VeloCloud signing up somebody every day. VeloCloud got a little mad at me earlier this year when I wrote a blog post that said that they were basically the new BroadSoft. And I say that because if everybody implements it the exact same way, it'll be a commodity faster than VoIP is. The carriers are going to have to be very specific about where they position and differentiate SD-WAN to the marketplace and to the channel so that we aren't all selling this like a commodity. At the show, I did hear how SD-WAN is already down to like $50 per site on a 400-site deal. I almost threw up in my mouth. It's already that low. So we've already commoditized our latest piece of tech. It's just crazy. At the show, I saw a couple of demos, and one of them that I have pictured here is the VeloCloud box being used for UCaaS. And all I kept thinking about while he was demoing is this is going to destroy Cisco. AdTran and Cisco are in deep trouble. So if you're a VAR and Cisco or AdTran are big partners of yours, SD-WAN is not going through tech data or any of that. All those boxes are OEM'd into the carrier who then drops them off at the customer. VARs aren't making money on that. VADs aren't making money on that. It's going to disrupt a bunch of silos of revenue pretty significantly. The other thing, cloud. The big why for cloud, and we've been talking about this for over 5 or 6 years, the big why still comes down to cost savings. There's something about our industry going all the way back to the pin drop of I'm going to save you money. And we hardly ever talk about value. We just talk about how we're going to save you money. And that's why we're in the state we're in today. giving it away and working harder and harder for the same dollar. The other thing, though, about cloud is all surveys point to the same thing. Once a customer buys 3 cloud apps, they start worrying about how many vendors they have, and they all want to go to one throat to choke. They want one provider, limited down. As a matter of fact, Yum Brands, which owns A&W, KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell, they spent a year getting all of their platforms down to a single vendor. And they're not even like what you would consider a high-tech company. So imagine your Fortune 500s are probably all thinking the same thing, need to reduce the vendor count. And that's to simplify things for management and simplify skill sets for personnel, so you're not paying a fortune to have 100 different vendor engineers lying around. But it also gives you the opportunity to be thinking about that. When you do hit an account, you could ask them how many vendors they have, and maybe you can help them shrink that down to one, where that one is you. One question I would remind you to ask yourself and then ask your customers is, how cloud attached are you? Recently here we had an outage with Brighthouse/Spectrum. Lasted a little while. I was out at a network event, and this insurance broker was complaining because he was in the outage. The outage lasted like, I don't know, hour and a half or something. But his 20 agents had nothing to do all day. For that hour and a half, they were twiddling their thumbs because he didn't realize that, like electricity, without internet, his business was dead. You should be asking your customers, how important is internet to them staying in business? Because it gives you the opportunity to sell DR, sell SD-WAN, and sell a redundant pipe, which is a whole lot better than just selling them a 20 meg pipe single. Sell them 2. Then sell them SD-WAN to connect it to. IoT, the Internet of Things. Ben Evans is a venture capitalist, and about a couple years ago he was famous for saying that mobile was going to eat the world, and he keeps a blog up about mobile eating the world, and we're at 2.5 million smartphones on the planet for a little over 7.3 billion people. So we're almost at half. And 3.8 billion Internet users, which means half of the world is on the Internet. There are 4 companies that control most of that. That's Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. They're bigger than Wintel ever was. Verizon saw 45% growth in data in 2016 and only a third so far in 2017. People are chewing up data. They're living on mobile. The last survey said 5 hours a day. And side note is IBM Watson is the very first branded artificial intelligence. It won't be the only one. It's just the first. Data breaches were big. March had 1.45 billion compromised accounts. It's unfathomable amount of hacking going on. And the really funny thing is as we swing the pendulum back to IPVPN, security is going to become really a fuzzy thing, because you're always playing a cat and mouse game, and they're not going to spend if they're switching to IPVPN to save money, they're probably not going to pay for extra security, which means hackathon every day. Ransomware. I don't know how much you guys have heard about this, but I saw this week that you could actually rent ransomware as a service for $150 per incident. And there are businesses that make $20 to $40 million a year on ransomware. Start selling cloud backup. It's the best insurance against ransomware. That way they only lose like a day's worth instead of months' worth of data, or all of their data. When you look at the top security pain points, the biggest problem is users and their dumb behavior. Clicking on links they shouldn't, clicking on documents they shouldn't, click, 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 letting everybody in. Users are the big problem. Other problem everybody sees is there's a skills gap. That's why managed services are so big, and that's why cybersecurity firms are so happy, because there aren't that many cybersecurity experts, and most companies can't afford to hire one. So managed services. So think about that. If you see a company that has had job openings over and over again for IT staff or whatever, ask them if they wouldn't rather outsource some of that. This was an interesting stat that 47% of jobs are at risk of being automated in the next 20 years. It's going to be less than that. And the jobs that you're going to need skills like creative thinking, problem solving, and consultative selling. And luckily, consultative selling means you have to know how to solve problems and think creatively. So if you're just order taking, you're going to be replaced by a robot. And now that you're all depressed, I'll give you some Prozac and a little bit of strategy. We all know bigger isn't better. I can't think of a single merger that ever resulted in anything better. They hardly ever do any actual real integration. They Band-Aid everything, which makes it miserable for us, but that's also an opportunity. We're going to see a whole bunch of errors during these integrations. It'll be nothing new. I don't care how much the carriers say they've got it down pat and they're going to figure this out. Too many legacy systems. And not for nothing, too little domain knowledge on how things happen inside these corporations. But you got to look for the sweet spot. And CompTIA says sweet spot is between 10 and 100 employees. And that's about 2 million businesses. So, you know, right now I'm doing some consulting for Verizon Wireless and their OneTalk product. And the sweet spot is 20. If you're not tackling some of that, you might want to think about ways to tackle that. Another thing is to be a linchpin. Seth Godin wrote a book called Linchpin, and I kind of liked it for a couple of reasons. One, if you're a freelancer or an agent, it was one kind of book. If you were a W-2, it was a different kind of book, but the same book. One of the things we do really, really well as agents, we buffer the user from the telco, and that's going to become never more important than in the next couple of years. The other is to be the connector, and I'll explain that in a little bit. As this entire industry of ours since '96 has bubbled up, we've often used resellers because dealing with the actual carrier is a pain in the neck, and it adds buffers. So there's us buffering and then the reseller buffering us. And I think that'll become even more important in the next 18 months than ever before because the consolidations are just, they're wacky. And that's one of the things that AireSpring has going for it. Besides, they are a buffer, they are a CLEC, they do have multiple connections to 16 carriers, so they get to be a buffer for you having to deal with those 16 carriers. Every order they have project management, and that's going to be key because I don't think we want to go out and hire PMs, but it's going to require PMs, especially when you're doing UCAS, SD-WAN. Somebody's got to manage that project. Post-Inc., there's a lot of work to get things right for the customer on UCAS, SD-WAN, and other complicated sales. I know we like to ink it and run away, but you need to ink it and have somebody that's going to deal with the project, and AireSpring has those people. They're also channel only, which means no channel conflict, which is not something you could say for a bunch of other companies that we deal with. They're also privately owned, family owned and operated, and debt-free, and they've been paying your commissions for 16 years on time. One of the reasons we have commodity pricing is because we tend to sell as replacement services. You know, if you think about SIP trunking taking over for PRIs, we replace broadband with a 10 meg pipe, it's transactional stuff. It's easy to sell that way. It makes the sale go a little quicker. And also, it's a lot less work. And selling tech as a product, also kind of the same thing. A lot less work. But the real money is in complicated deals, is in solution selling, is in finding pain points and giving them a complete solution, which as an agent, we're able to take multi-vendors, put them together, and make one cohesive solution for the customer that a single carrier can't do. And this is also about wallet share. You know, I know it's very easy to like say, oh, you want to quote for bandwidth? Go get the bandwidth quote, sell them bandwidth, and move along. And it's a lot harder to sit there and figure out why they want the bandwidth, and maybe that's not the best choice for them. Maybe they have other concerns that they think more bandwidth is going to solve. Maybe they have a cloud migration plan and have no idea who to talk to about it. All of these things that you sit right in the middle of, if you just have a deeper conversation with the customer, you're going to find a lot more opportunity. And then you're going to be able to sell multiple streams of income into one customer. And you can do that because you have multiple vendors to pick from. And selling is changing. The buyer's process has totally gotten more complicated. There's now more than 5 people involved in most B2B buying decisions. The big thing really is that cold calling is dead. Like 90% of people won't answer a cold email. They don't return voicemail. It gets harder and harder. Relationships become extremely important. Your network becomes really important. Referrals become one of the best ways to make money is referral. The other problem with the B2B process right now is most buyers are 70% of the way through the decision before they contact anybody, which means you either run with them for the last 30% where you're just providing quote and hope to God that they pick your quote. Basically, it's RFPs all over again. Or you have to back them all the way back up and try to figure out why they even went down this road. Like, what were they trying to solve? What's the business outcome? What's the pain point? And then you could sell against the pain instead of just trying to push in a quote for an RFP. It's a lot easier to win when you know the pain and you can push to the business outcome as opposed to just trying to sell an RFP. The other is LinkedIn. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. So if you don't have an updated profile, and a few little happy keywords like SD-WAN, IoT, and UCaaS in your profile, go log in right now and add those. And spend 15 minutes a week on LinkedIn making connections, see who's in your network, see who they can refer you to. And if you have customers, look at your top 10 customers. Find out if they have friends that you can help them the same way you helped your clients. Referrals are going to be key. And we're in a whole new era. Everything is flipped, and yet most people still have the same old thinking they had 10 years ago. And you can keep doing that, but you're going to get the same old results, and those results are kind of declining. If you look at the ILEX, who never had to have competition before, ever. They hated CLEX. They weren't paying attention to the cable company, and now most of them have no mindset whatsoever to figure out how to compete. So don't have that mentality. Realize it's a whole new world, a lot of opportunity, although there's a whole lot of change, and I know we all hate change. And you got to remember that the more complicated it is, the better it is for you. The simple stuff, e-commerce can do the simple stuff. The complicated stuff is where you get to shine and make the most money. If you can figure out where the problem is, then you're more like a doctor than you are just some broker. That elevates you up in the trust game, and you need trust to sell. So the other thing is figure out who your ideal customer is. Because if you sell into verticals, you'll end up being able to talk their language. The trust gets built a lot faster. You know, if you go into a bank and you're talking to them and you go, oh, you know, the last 3 banks I dealt with, they not only bought this, they bought this and this and this. They see you a lot differently than if you're just in there answering an RFP. If you have some experience to back it up and you can be like, oh, you know, I've already done 5 banks, and hey, maybe you know this bank. And name drop, it works. Helps make your job easier. And in a vertical, word of mouth echoes better in a silo than it does across a road. So inside a vertical, it's a lot easier. Like dentists talk to dentists. So if you help 2 or 3 dentists, your name gets out there a lot faster in that vertical than it would be if you helped a dentist, a florist, and a dry cleaner. Those guys probably don't talk all that often. And that's it. So any questions?
You were talking about the differentiators and the ability to differentiate. Proposition is for AireSpring. Can you repeat that or elaborate?
One of the big things for AireSpring is they have contracts with more than 10 carriers, and they can mix and match all of that. That makes it a lot easier to deal with one company than it does to have to deal with 10 separate companies. And in a lot of cases, I mean, I see it myself where, especially if you're talking NFL cities, not so much when you're talking about rural America, easier to get it all under one bill than it is to try to chase in 5 or 6 different carriers, especially if you're looking at, you know, one whole WAN instead of just individual sites. The other is they've been at it a really long time, and you guys wouldn't be on the phone today if you didn't have a positive experience with them anyway.
So a couple things I wanted to bring up. One, I liked your slide that showed VeloCloud and all the companies that they're working with. I've seen the demo of their orchestrator that's been almost exactly the same now from several different providers. And I'm just curious if you, or even AireSpring, if there's a sense of, how are these service providers going to differentiate themselves with the same backbone? With the same technology, with the VeloCloud technology. I don't see any difference. I mean, I know the price is the big thing, obviously, but we know what happens there. It's already happening.
Yep.
So we quickly coalesce in one little range. There's got to be something else. Do we see that on the horizon in any way? Or will there be serious competition to VeloCloud with all these providers?
If anybody can learn anything from UCaaS, it's that you have to add your own IP to the tech for it to work. And if you look at 8x8 and RingCentral, they've done that, right? RingCentral buying Glip, 8x8 buying, 4 or 5 companies in the last 2 years to kind of add integrations and add functionality so that it's not just UCaaS. It's kind of like Vonage buying G-Unify, so they had all the integration. If they can learn that lesson, then some of the carriers in SD-WAN will probably do the same thing. They'll figure out a way to add useful functionality beyond what just VeloCloud. If you look at Verizon, I mean, they have 3 SD-WAN providers. truly, I think VeloCloud gets bought by Cisco in less than 15 months.
Wow.
Because Cisco IWAN sucks, and VeloCloud just went back for another $80 million, so they're probably going to go back to the well for more money for a Series E, and when they do, Cisco will probably just buy them.
Well, was it Cisco that bought Meraki?
Yep.
They bought Meraki, and that's not going so well for them. I mean, it's kind of, the price point there is a tough one.
It wasn't built at home, and they have a bias towards hardware and what's built at home at Cisco. And Ruckus already had a lead. The only lucky thing for Cisco there was Ruckus got bought twice in a year. I forget who bought them the first time and then Brocade the second time. So in a year, the Ruckus vendors, were in uproar over who was going to own them. So they kind of got lucky. But at the same time, Adtran was selling managed Wi-Fi as a service, kind of like hardware as a service with management and all this other stuff. And I don't think Cisco was ready for that kind of competition. It's a brave new world. The big guys, look at Microsoft against Google. Yeah, they're winning with Office 365, but one of the reasons they're winning that war, MCSEs. If Google had MCSEs in every enterprise, they'd probably be winning the war, but they don't. So it's Microsoft wins because of the certified engineers lying around everywhere.
Relationships again.
Yeah. And I don't think, the thing about Cisco certifications, I don't think there are nearly enough CCNAs as there were, say, 7 years ago. And those guys were always beating the drum for Cisco. But then Cisco also had that huge security hole problem. So, they've had their own issues that have helped them move off the table a little bit. Plus, like I say, the SD-WAN boxes, that's not going to help anybody's business because that's all OEM'd. Those boxes could end up being a differentiator, though, without a doubt.
Peter, can you talk about SD-WAN? Is there confusion on what different providers, i.e. VeloCloud versus Digley versus Silver Peak? Are they all equal, or really is this something that we need to dig into deeper?
They're not all equal. The SD-WAN has become a lot like UC. If you looked at UC in the early days, it was really just hosted PBX and contact center. And then video conferencing got added, and then web conferencing got added, and then, and they just kept adding functionality underneath that umbrella. SD-WAN's umbrella is already kind of wide. Look at Riverbed says they're SD-WAN, and they're originally a WAN optimization company, and now they're, they say they're SD-WAN. Zero Outages was at the show, and they said they were their banner said, we are the first SD-WAN company. Okay, you were doing DR for years. Now you're the first SD-WAN company. Actually, if you want to back that up, OSPF was like the first SD-WAN functionality built into a router, straight failover. And, Big Leaf and a few of the others, you look at all of them, they were originally a one-function box, whether it was failover or line bonding or monitoring. So you have to, dig down and see, so it's a pain point thing. A lot of SD-WAN, you look at Earthlink has 4,000 sites of SD-WAN sold already. Probably about 3,999 of those are branch offices. They're Family Dollar stores or whatever. Guys that have a hard time getting broadband or any connectivity. But you got to run your POS system. You got to run credit card processing. You've got a voice line. All of that, all IP. So SD-WAN becomes a no-brainer there. But that functionality needed there is a lot simpler than, say, who a Fortune 500 company would be looking at SD-WAN for on a global basis. When I look at my mid-market clients, when we're talking SD-WAN, it's mainly because they have stuff on AWS, they have Office 365, they have some CRM, and it's hardly ever Salesforce. They have UCaaS, and all of that, again, it's all internet traffic. So they're looking at their MPLS and be like, okay, that's great for we could shrink that down to T1s and then get bigger pipes and have failover, and in the smaller locations it'll get a little cheaper, and again we'll have redundancy. Get two pipes that are cheaper to save some money, but also add something like failover to those areas. So you have to look at what functionality you want and who's got that functionality. And again, it comes back to you have to know what the business outcome is needed. It's not the same for everybody. And I know I keep beating the same drum, and it's hard to get that because not all the time can the business even articulate what it is they're trying to get from all of that, especially smaller businesses. But a CIO should be able to articulate what he's going to be bonused on as the metric for project performance. And once he tells you what that metric is, then you know exactly what the business outcome needs to be.
The things that I keep, bumping into with some of my clients, and these are not necessarily that 10 to 100 size. They might be more like 100 to 250 size. And they've got some decent MPLS networks because, your conversation around the MPLS, I think, is really something to take note of. We know there's going to be compression as they move, as you illustrated. However, it seems like there is an opportunity for us for revenue. The idea of sell them a second connection and then sell them SD-WAN to connect it is a good thing. Do you see that as being a price strategy, or shall we say an ROI strategy that will become acceptable? Because it seems like such a new and different conversation, like trying to get the customers to get their heads around that. Yeah, I'm going to be spending the same, maybe a little more money, but I'm going to have this redundancy. Like in that range of account, I'm struggling trying to get customers to hear that. I'm curious if anybody has any input, experience, anything along those lines to share.
So when I was at the WAN Summit, and like the Gap was talking about it over and over again because he's done it the longest, one of the things for him was that it was more about uptime than anything. A retail store can't really afford to not take credit cards. And then once he looks at that and talks about what's 1 hour of downtime going to cost, just in sales, and you look at a retail store, if they don't know what their sales are per hour, then they have other problems. But that against what it costs per month to have 2 pipes instead of 1, and the other is to make them realize how cloud attached they are. Maybe they don't realize it, because they still see hardware, right? You still have a cash register, even if it's square and looks pretty, it's still a cash register. That inventory control is sitting somewhere. All of that is like some of the light bulb turning on that we have to do as agents, because in the back of their mind they may realize it, but until you whiteboard it out for them. And the other was the whiteboarding of, you're going to have to whiteboard the crap out of WANs going forward, because it's, when they go to SD-WAN, it's going to be a hodgepodge. It's going to be this cable guy here and this Celco there, and an ILEC DSL circuit with a cable circuit, or satellite and 4G. It's not going to be like
that goes against the simplicity conversation where they're asking for less and less providers.
It does, but it also depends on price point and availability, which again it goes back to pick a vendor who has a lot of that. There are vendors in the market space that hit a lot of carriers, and you'll get a lot of that under one bill. It's going to be interesting how it shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
It is, because it's really going to come down to what are they looking to get out of all of this. I get they don't like the MPLS and it's complicated and it's expensive and blah, 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 but they've probably never been hacked either. They don't realize how expensive that is, or they have been hacked and just don't know it. It depends on what industry. What we're seeing now, mainly it's retail running to SD-WAN.
Yes, and firstly I'd like to thank Peter for a very good clarification of the challenges that our agents are facing and developing strategies for them to help them through these interesting times.